You've probably seen that white dish bolted to a roof in the middle of nowhere. A farmhouse, a fishing boat, a cabin with no cell signal for 50 miles. You assumed it was just satellite internet. It's not. It's the largest object humans have ever put into orbit, generating $11.4 billion in a single year. And every one of those satellites is engineered to die on purpose. SpaceX chart. Here's the contradiction nobody sits with long enough to notice. StarLink's core product is designed to burn up in the atmosphere and be replaced every 5 years on a business that requires spending billions of dollars a year just to keep the lights on. And yet, this disposable satellite company just posted $4.4 billion in operating profit. A company that lights money on fire in low Earth orbit, on purpose, constantly, somehow runs a fatter margin than most fiber internet providers on the ground. That's the whole mystery of this video. SpaceX chart. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a satellite that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and lasts 5 years can still turn a profit. You'll understand why SpaceX needed to become a rocket company before it could become an internet company. You'll see the actual gatekeeper costs that killed every satellite internet company before this one. And you'll understand why the same dish sitting on a rural rooftop is quietly subsidizing super yachts, airlines, and militaries paying 40 times as much for the same signal. At the smallest tier, this is a single residential rooftop. One StarLink standard kit. One household, roughly $120 a month for unlimited high-speed internet in a place cable never reached. Multiply that by the current customer base, and the number gets absurd fast. StarLink now counts 10.3 million subscribers as its first quarter 2026 base. And independent analysts tracking the growth curve say the company has been roughly doubling its customer count every year for 3 straight years running, from 2.3 million house at the end of 2023 to over 9 million a year later. SpaceX chart. The next tier up isn't residential at all. It's commercial mobility. StarLink Maritime puts a marine-grade terminal on a cargo ship or super yacht for a setup cost in the thousands of dollars and a monthly bill that can run into the thousands more. Because a container ship in the middle of the Pacific will pay almost anything for a stable connection. StarLink Aviation does the same thing at 35,000 feet, with airlines paying 6-figure annual contracts per aircraft to give every passenger gate-to-gate Wi-Fi. Above that sits the government and enterprise tier. Direct contracts with militaries, disaster response agencies, and national governments buying bulk capacity, sometimes for entire regions at once. And then there's the flagship extreme. Direct to cell, the feature that turns an ordinary unmodified smartphone into a satellite phone with zero new hardware, launched in partnership with T-Mobile and now expanding. To carriers worldwide, it's the single most audacious tier of the model, selling connectivity not to a dish, but to a phone you already own, anywhere on Earth. But the sticker price on that $349 dish is just the start. The first hidden cost is spectrum. The specific radio frequencies StarLink is licensed to use are regulated country by country, and getting approved in a new market can take years of negotiation with a national telecom regulator before a single customer there can even order a kit. The second hidden cost is orbital slots and collision management. Every satellite StarLink puts up has to be tracked, maneuvered around debris, and eventually deorbited before it becomes space junk itself. And with a constellation now past 9,600 active satellites, SpaceX runs one of the most active automated collision avoidance systems ever built, because a single mistake risks a cascading debris field that could threaten the whole industry. SpaceX chart. The third hidden cost is manufacturing cadence. Satellites don't sit in a warehouse waiting to be launched. They're built on a rolling production line at a company-reported capacity of up to 45 satellites a week, because the whole model depends on constantly replacing dying hardware faster than it fails. Slow the factory down for even a few months, and the constellation starts to age out from underneath you. Here's the toy version first. Imagine you're not launching satellites. You're just buying a delivery truck. Normal truck costs you $80,000, and once it's used up, you scrap it and buy a new one for another $80,000. Now imagine somebody invents a truck you can land, refuel, and fly again 40 times before it wears out. Your cost per delivery doesn't just drop a little, it collapses. That's the entire StarLink business model in one sentence. SpaceX didn't build a better satellite, it built a cheaper truck. Before reusable rockets, putting a satellite into orbit meant throwing away a multi-million-dollar rocket every single launch. That's why every satellite internet company before StarLink, Iridium, Globalstar, Teledesic, had to treat every satellite as a rare, precious, impossibly expensive asset, built to last 15 years because launching a replacement was almost as expensive as the first one. StarLink flipped that completely. Because SpaceX owns its own reusable Falcon 9 rockets, it can launch roughly 28 to 29 satellites on a single booster that's already flown a dozen times before, at a fraction of what a competitor pays a third party just to get to orbit. That single fact changes the entire economics of the satellite. Instead of building one satellite to last 15 years, heavily shielded, redundantly engineered, insanely expensive, SpaceX builds a satellite to last about 5 years, cheaply, and simply launches a new one when it dies. It's the same logic as a phone company choosing to sell you a $200 phone every 2 years instead of a $3,000 phone. Built to survive a decade. Cheap and disposable, done at volume, beats expensive and durable almost every time. Now scale it to real numbers. With over 9,600 satellites in orbit and a manufacturing line building dozens more every week, SpaceX has turned satellite construction into something closer to an assembly line than a bespoke aerospace project. And that's the only reason the unit economics work. Layer the revenue on top. $11.4 billion in 2025 revenue, up 49.8% year over year, against a network that costs a fortune to build, but comparatively little to operate once it's up. And you get $4.4 billion of operating income in a single year, on a business model everyone assumed would bleed cash forever. SpaceX chart plus 2. So here's the whole StarLink business model. In one sentence, it's not an internet company that happens to use satellites. It's a reusable rocket company that figured out the cheapest way to keep replacing satellites is to stop trying to make them last. Every dish you see on a roof is doing something most people never think about. It's not talking to one satellite. It's constantly handing itself off between satellites moving overhead at roughly 17,000 miles per hour, tracking and reconnecting multiple times a minute without you ever noticing a dropped call. Behind that dish is a laser mesh network, satellites talking directly to each other in orbit via optical inter-satellite links, moving data at up to 100 Gbps per link, so that a signal from a remote village can hop satellite to satellite across an ocean before it ever touches a ground station. That mesh is what lets StarLink serve places with zero terrestrial infrastructure at all. No fiber, no cell towers, nothing. Pricing is engineered too. Notice the terminal itself is sold below its true production cost in many markets. A classic razor and blades move. Except here, the razor costs SpaceX real money to subsidize, because the real profit lives entirely in the recurring monthly subscription. And in congested cities and dense suburbs, StarLink has quietly introduced congestion-based pricing. Extra fees in high-demand areas, because unlike fiber, this network has a genuinely finite amount of bandwidth per satellite over any given patch of sky. Sell too many subscriptions in one dense zip code, and everyone's speed drops, so price becomes the traffic valve. The clearest winner in this story is the company itself. SpaceX started in 2002 as a rocket company most of the aerospace industry assumed would fail. Its first 3 Falcon 1 launches all ended in explosions before a 4th attempt finally reached orbit in 2008, at a point where the company was reportedly weeks from running out of money entirely. StarLink wasn't even announced until 2015, launched its first real satellites in 2019, and opened to public beta in October 2020. with a modest base of early rural customers. Fast forward to today, over 10.3 million paying subscribers, more than 11 billion annual revenue, and a constellation making up roughly 2/3 of every active satellite currently orbiting Earth. What started as the side project funded by a rocket company's ambitions to reach Mars has become the financial engine keeping that rocket company airborne. StarLink now accounts for well over half of SpaceX's total revenue, according to analyst estimates. The rocket company built an internet company to pay for the rockets, and the internet company ended up bigger than the rockets ever were. SpaceX chart. SpaceX chart failure pattern. 1. Underestimating launch cost as the entire game. Iridium, the most famous cautionary tale in this industry, spent roughly $5 billion building its original satellite phone constellation in the 1990s using expendable rockets. No reusability, no cost curve to ride down. It launched commercially in 1998, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within about a year, and its entire multi-billion-dollar satellite network was eventually sold off for approximately $25 million, pennies on the dollar, because the underlying cost structure never had a path to profitability once launch costs were fixed and enormous. Failure pattern 2. Misjudging how fast satellite technology ages. OneWeb, a well-funded competitor backed by SoftBank, burned through billions of dollars building a constellation and filed for bankruptcy protection in March 2020 after failing to secure a new funding round mid-build-out, done in by the same trap that's haunted this industry for decades. Satellite constellations require continuous, massive capital investment for years before any meaningful revenue arrives, and if funding pauses even briefly, the whole timeline collapses along with it. In February 2022, SpaceX launched a batch of 49 new StarLink satellites into orbit, right into the path of a geomagnetic storm nobody had forecast with enough warning. The storm thickened Earth's upper atmosphere just enough to dramatically increase drag on the freshly launched satellites, which were still flying low before reaching their final operational altitude. One by one, up to 38 of the 49 satellites lost the fight against atmospheric drag and re-entered the atmosphere, burning up completely. An entire launch's worth of hardware, worth tens of millions of dollars, destroyed within days by a solar event nobody could fully predict. It was a visceral reminder that this entire business model lives at the mercy of a variable no engineer can fully control: the sun itself. So, here's the resolution to the paradox from the top of this video. A company that deliberately builds disposable, short-lived hardware isn't reckless. It's the only version of this business that actually works, because the traditional model of building satellites to last 15 years only made sense when launching them, was catastrophically expensive. Once SpaceX solved reusable rockets, cheap and replaceable stopped being a weakness and became the entire competitive advantage. The math only works at volume, at cadence, and at a launch cost nobody else on Earth currently has access to. Scenario 1. The residential subscriber, the smallest unit in this entire empire. Setup cost around $349 for the terminal. Annual subscription cost around $1,140. Essentially zero operating cost on the customer's end beyond electricity. And a payback that's immediate. You get broadband on day one, somewhere it never existed before. Scenario 2. The flagship enterprise. Account, a maritime or aviation contract. Setup cost in the tens of thousands of dollars for marine or aircraft-grade hardware and installation. Annual service cost that can run into the hundreds of thousands depending on data volume. Operating overhead for integration and maintenance. And a payback measured not in convenience, but in operational value. A cargo ship that can now track cargo in real time, or an airline that can sell Wi-Fi as a premium seat upgrade, both recouping the cost within a single operating year through revenue the connection itself makes possible. Same dish technology, same satellites overhead, two completely different economic worlds. And that's the real StarLink business model. Sell a struggling rural household broadband for $120 a month, and use that same infrastructure to sell a cargo ship or an Air Force 40 times more. all off the same constellation. Which tier surprised you most? The residential rooftop or the $11 billion machine sitting above it? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want the next one of these broken down the same way.